This time, it is really my pleasure to introduce two wonderful women that have very impressive credentials from Evolve Partner Group. Dr. Lois Lang is a founding partner of Evolve Partner Group, and she's a family business expert, an author, speaker. For over 2 decades, she has assisted family business transitions by assessing the next generation's readiness, strengthening the executive team, and facilitating tough conversations. I could go on about Dr. Lang and all with her impressive publications we will mention at the end of the session. Rebecca Spicer also joins us as a partner from Evolve Partner Group. She's experienced in leading projects involving business strategy, process improvement, and procedural changes that support organizational efficiency. She's very skillful in collaborating with clients to design innovative and creative solutions to complex problems that support business growth and sustainability. It is really my honor to have you. Also, Rebecca Spicer and Dr. Lang are members of our board. So we really appreciate your contribution to the IFB and our membership. So let me turn it over to you, Dr. Lang. It's all yours.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And welcome to everyone. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly because so Rebecca and I are going to take slides, and we want to have time at the end to actually maybe even talk about a conflict that people have had so that we can, work through it together. So let's talk first about the sources of conflict. See if it will move down. So these are all the different ones, and it doesn't mean that there aren't more than these, but this just gives you a heading of what it's under. And I'm going to start with the bottom half and end with the top, because the top is where I see most conflict. So status is a challenge. Who's the boss, who reports to whom, any of those types of things end up causing challenge. Decision making can be a place where conflict occurs. Scarcity of resources is a really big one. Who gets what? How much do they have? Does one department have more budget than another department? Different goals and tasks. So if you're not clear about where you're headed, that is always a big thing. The middle bottom one, the different roles that we play, that is obviously a challenge, especially in family businesses where when does it pass from the founding generation to the next? Who is actually the CEO? Is it truly what the org chart says, or what in practice happens? And then different perspectives. We all see the world in a really different way. So it's amazing to me when I go into conflict mediation and I'll ask about a conflict that people have had. And I'll be talking to 3 or 4 people about the exact same meeting, and I will hear widely different stories about what happened in that meeting. So, we all have to remember that our perspective colors whatever relationship that we're in. I'm ending with value and fairness because these are the two where I categorize. I went through, I'd love to say I do 2 or 3 conflict mediations a year. The reality is I did that last week. We probably, unfortunately, a lot of times when we're talking about succession or just how do people talk to each other, conflict is very, very common in business, period. And then you add family on top of that, and you generally have a whole lot of conflict. It's normal. It's working together and then playing together. And I have a lot of families who'll say, oh, we're not going to talk about the business when we get together at Thanksgiving. And I can tell you that the day after Thanksgiving is one of my busiest days of the year. And that's not because people are calling me and saying, oh, that was lovely, that was fun. No, because halfway through past the gravy, someone started saying, Aunt Susie should have known that that department, that project was going to go over budget, and she didn't let any of us know, and she did it on purpose. And there goes Thanksgiving. So I look at these two because I tracked about 200 different conflicts that I have personally been involved in. And these are all the way from small relationship conflicts up to conflicts that are, large, like where does the business go now? Should we add another line of business or not? Does a family member absolutely have a place in the business because their last name is whatever? So value is huge, and I look at it as two different things. Do I have the same values you do? That's one thing that really comes into play. Often with families, the values are very similar, so I'm not usually as worried about that. It is more about the value of how do I value you? Do people appreciate the work I do? Do they think that I'm adding to the company or just taking from the company? That's the bigger part. Or one person thinks they bring more value than another person, and that will come up. The next one is fairness. Am I treated fairly? My brother gets a car and this and that, and I only got this one. So fairness is also a large one.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned, let's see, one more fairness concern is compensation. Am I being compensated fairly? And when there's this perceived threat or this perceived uneven favor is when we'll see family members or even other employees within the organization display some common behaviors. And so those common behaviors are lack of communication, blocking information, refusing to discuss the business decisions as such, gossip, and using aggressive, condescending language. All of these behaviors, symptoms, have the potential to impact your morale and productivity, as well as the motivation throughout the organization. So it really is important for family businesses to learn how to manage the conflict inside the family so that good family decisions surface, individuals can grow in healthy ways, and that relationships really can achieve their potential. We prefer peace and harmony in our family, so we'll usually tolerate the minor skirmishes, disagreements, and what we really fear and do the poor job of managing is that conflict that divides people or hurts our relationships. That makes it agreements and solutions to the problems hard to put in place. But if the conflict is left unaddressed, then there are consequences. So those consequences can be monetary, that can be legal costs or other costs associated. We'll have stress and burnout, which we know carries additional concerns regarding an individual's health and mental wellness as well. The personal and professional consequences with stress and burnout could be ranging from substance abuse to anxiety or job dissatisfaction. We'll also see escalating conflict. So this can be the current conflict that escalates, or the conflict might spin off into several different conflicts within the business, and then you'll be engaging with a mediator. That mediator also goes part of the additional costs incurred. We'll also see lack of employee commitment, maybe a high turnover in a department. Conflict will inhibit the timely decision-making and paralyze your planning. And importantly, it will also deteriorate your working relationships, which then affects the trust and the teamwork, self-esteem, respect, morale. And all of those, when left unaddressed, will impact your business performance, estate planning, your personal happiness and growth. And from there, conflict really will escalate through a predictable path. That path can be seen within 4 stages. Let's go there. So the 4 stages of family business conflict. First one is minor disagreements. And minor disagreements can be as simple as just seeing things differently. So these are predictable, healthy debates, usually worked through with respect and compromise. You do want to be cautious that it doesn't get too personal, turn into personalized attacks, and just stuck in entrenched opposition. If the conflict is left and escalates, if it's prolonged, or if the conflict becomes personalized, then you enter into the second stage of a serious dispute. And serious disputes may start as a minor disagreement, when they're left to fester and grow, and we see feelings of disrespect and start to see blame and defensiveness. When conflict is in this stage, it must be addressed quickly. And it's also important to prevent the parties that are in the conflict from recruiting allies to their cause and adding a whole nother layer of complexity to finding a resolution. Third would be destabilizing conflicts. And in this stage, we'll see factions develop, the stakes are higher, and participants find it more difficult to back away from their positions. The anxiety is high, anger is expressed aggressively, and parties will often feel their identity attacked, which leads to the 4th and final stage of warfare. Intense hostility, entrenched positions, usually they're seeking revenge, and that's where we'll see the lawsuits. Simply, warfare threatens the existence of an organization as well as relationships. The positions are so entrenched that for some, it becomes more of a priority to be right or just to seek revenge. Relationships that endure this stage of conflict are often permanently damaged, and the family and company will be changed. It could be divided or even destroyed. Let's see. So we've talked about the sources and the stages. I'll give it back to Lois unless Lois has anything else to add. And then we'll start looking at how do we address the conflict now?
Actually, I'll stay on this slide for a minute, Rebecca. And a lot of this is, I would love to say that we primarily work in 1 and 2, but the reality is we're often called in at 3 or 4. So while I have experience in 1 and 2, I have seen frequently how 3 devolves into 4 very quickly. And I try to always think, it's funny is I do this and I do it personally with my own clients. So I think I really have it down, and then I'll have a conflict in my own life that I have to take a step back and say, what part of that was me? What part of that was them? And if we can stay in 1 and 2, we generally can do really well. And I look at my clients who stay in 1 and 2, and here are some of the things that, I don't know if I'm going off target here, but it's good. Here are some of the things I see in 1 and 2 that keep it there. And that is sitting down, letting at least 24 to 48 hours go beyond when you have the conflict, and then sitting down and really talking it out and using really, really good communication skills where I think I noticed this. I'm wondering if you saw, so that you're not pushing the other person to a defensive posture. Once you have pushed a person over into a corner, you start heading into 3 pretty quickly. And that's where it's hard to pull it back, because that then personal attacks happen, and then you end up with conflict layered on top of conflict. I'll take the next one. So part of, when I look at addressing the conflict, part of what I look at first is, can you do this internally, or do you need to get external help? You can do it internally, absolutely, when both parties are sincerely willing to work things out and your past conflicts have been moderate. If you've had some really heavy conflicts, that moves you into getting some help to make it happen. So you identify your interests and what a successful solution would look like. You generate options and agree on solutions, and you implement and monitor solutions. So right now I'm working through a mediation with a company that we started on the 1, 2, 3, and when we didn't even get beyond 1, it has been like 4 or 5 conversations because they can't agree on what a successful solution looks like. And that part's really, you've got to say, we'll all know our roles and responsibilities. We'll stick within the areas that we should be in. We'll have conversations. We'll decide on the vision of the business. But if you can't identify that end result, going further doesn't make sense, because then people start to stay in their own areas and they start separating out even further. So you have to decide on what a successful end would look like. Even if you don't know how you're going to get there, at least decide on what it's going to look like or why it's going to look that way. External, you definitely would need help if the trust is really broken or there have been a lot of personal attacks against each other. The little thinking cloud, the reason I love this one is if one of the 2 parties is not willing to work through the conflict, internal or external help is not going to work, period. So I will often interview both people or groups of people before I get moving. And if I know that one of them just is absolutely not going to move on their position, they're staying on their position, they can't stand the other person, I know that likelihood is I can get them together for a session or 2, but they are often headed to mediation or to legal means. Okay, next. So these sound really easy and simple, and they're hard to practice, and they will buy you a lot. So if you are going to go into any kind of conflict resolution with people, I will often have one side primarily speaking the first time. Once you get going back and forth, it has the chance of escalating quickly and becoming, being out of control. So if you're going to do it, it can even be that you set something very clear that one person will talk for 15 minutes and the other person will talk for the next 15 minutes. And you absolutely stick to that. I ask the person who is not doing the talking to take notes because I think it helps you focus and stay really in the moment of listening versus listening to reply. Once you do the listening, when you're really not listening, you just are ready to, you're formulating your debate in your head. So if you know you have that 15 minutes, while it might be very difficult to be the person listening, it is, you're saying that other person is valued. You are really making for a very safe, non-defensive type of thing. And I've had many a times where we'll get like 5 minutes in and the big thing will come up like, you stole one of my toys when you were 8 years old.
We would like to call on some of our family members that are here with us just to start working through this. So the first one, if everyone can just start describing the hardest conflict that you have had in the last 10 years in your business. We're going to discuss, how did it go? And looking back and knowing what you know now, how would you have handled the conflict differently? She should be back here shortly, but this will at least give us some time to start considering about our answers.
Wonderful. Would you like me to help volunteer a few individuals, or is there anybody?
Yeah, please. That would be great.
Wonderful. Is there anybody that would like to start by sharing some of the hardest conflicts you had as a family in the last 10 years in your business? I can start with me. I would say that in our family business, I was the accountant at a very early age, and one of the things that would aggravate me was to see my sister spending all this money on restaurants and things that were not necessarily related to the business, and I would be the guy that would confront her. And so I mean that's something as simple as that was a reason to get upset and to come back and have a conflict. And Dr. Lang is back with us. We were just going over the different conflicts that everybody has experienced, and I volunteer mine because it's always hard to volunteer somebody else unless you start with yourself.
I heard that one, and that one's a common one. We have two brothers who consistently will call me and say, he got a truck before I got a truck, and another one coming and saying, he got a raise last time I didn't, and when you turn around, somebody took a distribution they weren't supposed to. So, that's a common type of conflict. If people don't want to talk specifically about theirs, they might want to just talk generally.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I would I've only been with my in-laws for 2 years now. I just finished my bachelor's, and I think so. Me and my husband will be the third generation. And I wouldn't say it was a conflict, but like an issue was that his grandparents passed away very unexpectedly. So the second generation that took it on, which is my mother-in-law and her husband, it was like a very huge adjustment. And I know that was hard for a long time, but they definitely overcame that. And I know that the grandpa would be really proud now because they've done so much with the company and it's grown. But now as we come into it as a third generation, I'm actually reading Dr. Lang's book right now as we speak, but it's going to be it's just different. And I think that's going to be an issue, but at the same time, it's what we want, and there's no siblings. So that's kind of the different thing, is that my husband's sibling does not want anything to do with it, which is, I think, a good thing. And same with my in-laws, the siblings wanted nothing to do with it. So we don't have that sibling problem, but just that third generation, we're both very young coming into the company and trying to find and earn that respect from people.
Right. So is there a question in there, Hannah?
No, I was just trying to share to get the ball rolling.
Okay, sounds good. And I think, though, that she brings up a really good point, is that if not just with the family, but other employees see you wandering around the warehouse when you're 13, 14, 15, it's hard to translate that then as you go to college and come back, and the respect with that.
I like to share some experience. This is JP Sethi.
Yes.
First conflict I had was 1983, when in a partnership with a friend of mine without any formal agreement. And I can tell you, if one of the parties, like you mentioned, is willing to give up a little bit, then you can solve every conflict.
Yes.
I was able to solve the conflict, just kind of taking the position, okay, I'll give in a little more than I should, and let's move on.
Right.
And that was back in 1983, looking at about $400,000 dispute. Then I faced it again, second time, it was my father, and I had no winning hand anyway because my father. So I again said, okay, you can call the shot and you can have whatever property you want out of the 15, 18 real estate properties we had. So we were able to resolve it within ourselves. Is it easy? No, it's very painful,
Right.
because you are tolerating injustice and letting go something that belongs to you or you deserve it. But I think the attitude is, I don't want to put up with this nonsense. I can do it again. If you feel confident on your skills and yourself, taking a little bit of a shortcut or a beating is a long-term, it is a good deal, as far as I have learned 2 or 3 times in the last 40 years. So personally speaking, I have taken 3 times without going to attorney, spending time, rather taking the beating, say move on, I can do it again. And God bless, it worked out every time.
Very good. Thank you so much. And I wrote down some of the things that you talked about. Being willing to negotiate on both sides is a big part. That's why I said that one question is really important is, what does a successful solution look like? So it might be that we go our separate ways, or that we keep the business moving, and that we still are able to talk to each other. And once you know what that end looks like, then you can say, well, I'm going to have to compromise. The other part that JP brought up that I thought is really, really important is written documents are really helpful in keeping conflict away. So to give you an example of one right now, I'm working with a very large family held farm. In fact, it's held by 2 different families, and they did not have a buy-sell agreement. So now we're talking about, dividing of equipment, dividing of land in order to get to the next generation. And it's a negotiation about price, and they're off by at least, 1.5 to 3 million, depending on which side you talk to. That's a huge amount of money. But one that I had 2 years ago that went through this, mediated, I helped them. We went from room to room. We had a written agreement, signed, got about a month and a half into it. And all of a sudden the other side decided they didn't like what had been decided. And by the time they were finished with 2 attorneys and the case going, it was 1.2 million. They would have been better off to just split the difference and make it happen versus, seeking revenge through the court system is just extremely expensive. So written documents, please ahead of time, buy-sell agreements, so that there is a clear, this will pass at book value, or this will pass at book value with a discount. But same thing, written documents internally. What do you have? Job descriptions, who has what role, who reports to whom. The more clear things are, the less likely you are to have conflict.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I had a quick question. My name is Lauren, and this is my first time jumping onto one of these webinars, and before coronavirus, our family wanted to come to the actual meetings there at Fresno State. We're a 4th generation farming company here in Sanger, and we are 2 separate families. So it's 2 brothers that the parents passed the business on to, and now myself, my father, and my cousin are now coming on to the business now. We've been in the business for 5 years. And so originally, like you're saying right now, this documentation portion, how do you establish something after, I mean, it's been decades of, you know, there's never been any kind of structure in regards to, you know, power, or how much time can someone take off, or how is it determined to get a pay raise, or like, how do you establish that now? Because now it's becoming an issue where, you know, the next generation is coming on, and, you know, each parent is sticking up for their child in some regards, that it's like, it gets to the point where it's like, how do you establish the documentation in a form after it's been so loose for so many years?
Very painfully. That's why I say documents ahead of time are much better, and you can do it afterwards. You can start saying, we're having all these different issues, and one group that I worked with, it sounds very similar to yours. What I did is we sent out like a monkey survey and asked people what they thought the top 5 issues were at that point, and we just started talking. One of them was very similar to yours. They had things about paid time off. So what does vacation look like? And one family member was never taking one, and another family member was taking 6 to 8 weeks a year. So we slowly worked through agreements, put it in an employee handbook so that everybody knew this is how you get into the business, this is how you stay, here's how raises happen. So it's just something to start working through, because if you don't have them, it's really hard. It's kind of like, we, generally speaking, when we talk about family councils, we ask them to have a family charter, and in the family charter, there will be different, I call them protocols, but there'll be different agreements, like what does employment in the family look like? So it'll detail that there has to be a job opening. They have to have the qualifications in order to do it. They will be paid at market rate, and not more or less than that. And prenups are very common. And if you can even do post-nups. So there are ways to do documents that are after what you're already doing that will help determine the future for the next group. It's always easier to do it when there's not a conflict, but you can do it during a conflict also.
Another question for you is like, when other family members like I don't know if they'll take advantage of, but like in our case, like use equipment for their own personal use, or
Right.
maybe like, for example, like we have one of our family members is farming their own piece of property, which benefits only them, but
Yep.
they start giving themselves discounted rates on the labor costs and so forth and so on. How do you structure? Do you say, hey, we're going to treat everybody as if it were any of our other clientele, or is there a family, like how do you determine that kind of structure for those situations?
Everybody has to get together and decide on what that's going to be. I mean, I know that with the person that is already doing it, it is more difficult. You know, some of the ones I have will give like a 10% discount. So they do something because you're family, but it is still very clear about usage of anything that is business. You know, a lot of you have gone, and I see it over and over again, that as you well know, the move from first to second generation is one of the most difficult. That keeps being said over and over again, but from second to third, third to fourth, they're all challenging. Business itself is challenging. So anything that you can get in writing and agree to, the bigger thing is though, is you can do all of that, and then you have to consistently practice it, because if you don't, that will, you know, that just heaps on more conflict on top of it. Yeah.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Sorry, if anyone else has questions, please go ahead.
So are there other questions? I can also tell horror stories if people just want to hear good stuff. And I'd also like to volunteer my services to, I think it was Brian, because he's in Ireland. I'm good with flying to Ireland.
Yeah, I'd love to hear something that's extreme case that you have dealt with in the past.
Okay. One of them is, I've written 3 books, and the first book has one that, so I'll tell you the backstory of that book is I never intended to be an author. I like to write, but I never intended that to be where I was headed. And I was working with a father and a son trying to transfer the business. And it was actually 2nd to 3rd generation. And Dad was an extremely, how would I put it, difficult man. That would be the nice, polite, professional thing to say. And I was going back and forth with them trying to negotiate the transfer of shares. The son was willing to buy the shares and not just increasing his salary to purchase shares, but like an outright sale of the stock. And it got to the point where it absolutely wasn't going to work. Dad had brought me in. He decided I was a failure. He fired me. He turned around after his son bought completely, paid outright for the company, and he turned around and he sued his son. I still have not figured out how they ever got into court. I was wishing that it was Florida so that they could throw it out as a frivolous lawsuit. But $350,000 later, the son was able to prove that he had bought the stock in a correct way at a fair price. But it was to the point where I think Dad at that point was about 78. And fast forward 4 years later, the wife of the original founding father called me and said, you know, he's on his deathbed. Can you please call and talk to our son? Because he won't pick up the phone for us. So I called him and he says, I'm not going to see my dad. I said, come on, he's dying. So you really just need to loop around and let that go. But that's how bad, you know, it can get. And it really was a person who did not want, you know, his dad did not want his son to be successful. And his son had actually expanded the company, you know, 2 to 3 times what Dad had. So it's just kind of a very sad one. I'm happy to say that he did go see his dad, and his dad lived for another 6 months, and they ended up having like a Tuesday with Maury. He would go and sit and talk to him, and they reconnected. But it was a very painful 4 years when they were in the middle of the lawsuit.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Was that gory enough, JP?
That was good. Thank you.
I guess he's trying to find ways to make sure our family never gets there.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it sounds like you guys, I mean, he's already had experience with making a partnership work and negotiating and being flexible. He's absolutely right. If both sides will at least listen to each other, that's why I do that 15-minute thing, because most people, somewhere between 15 minutes to 30 minutes, will run out of steam. and start being more reasonable when they hear themselves talk. And if the message is really difficult, I will have them wait for a week to have the other person reply. And all of those techniques just are a way to slow the conversation down. If you ever get in a conversation and somebody sounds like me, I talk a lot fast. You want to slow it down, because the escalation back and forth is a killer.
Good to know.
Does anybody else have a time that they would like to talk about, not necessarily that didn't go well, but like JP, where it did go well, and what do you think you did that made that happen?
Well, you know, like you said, then the last conflict I had was the downturn in 2009 and 10, when the hotel business, along with many other business, went kaboom, and
Yep.
there were a couple of partners. When you have a capital call, it's not very pleasant. You know, you give them the draws and dividends, everybody's happy. So, so it got pretty ugly between me and one of my partners. We did not find a resolution because we could not disagree upon the asset value. Now you're looking at 25, 30 million worth of assets.
Yep.
And that was we met about 7 times, but we could not come to an agreement. So things got great in 2011, 12, making money. First thing I did, I hired a very good law firm out of Los Angeles, and I produced 20 buy-sell agreements.
Yes.
I sat with my partners, spent maybe 3-4 hours, came out with a solution. Hey, appraisal number 1, company orders. If you don't agree, you order number 2. If you don't agree, company orders third one. You take first and the third average, you are done. No
Very
agreement,
good.
nothing. So I do not do any more projects unless the other party signs our buy-sell agreement. We don't even move forward regardless who they are.
Exactly.
And so we done 20 deals since then. Every one of them has been with the buy-sell agreement, and we don't change our buy-sell agreement. So
Right.
this is set in stone. It's been vetted out by attorneys, by 2 partners. If you don't like it, sorry, but have it, read it. That's the best thing came out of all that nightmare I went through for about a year. A lot of stress, a lot of sleepless night. There was no profit, and the capital call, banks were calling you. So it wasn't pretty year, but we came out pretty smart, pretty good, very confident, and we haven't looked back since then.
Good. Was there a minority discount on the assets?
Yes, we kept a discount, I mean, a 10% discount.
Okay.
And if the seller does not have money, they can pay 30% upfront.
Okay.
Rest the buyer will carry for three years at 2% above what we pay the bank
Right.
on that
Okay.
asset. If we pay the bank 4%, the outgoing party will pay 6%. I'm sorry, the outgoing party will get 6%.
Right.
Plus 30% down payment, and they have 3 years to get fully paid. That's just an option.
Right.
And we put in some trigger point. If you passed away, we don't want your spouse in there.
Yes.
Boom, we're gonna buy her out. So there's certain bullet points in there. It is very detailed, probably, 47 pages.
Yes.
It wasn't cheap, to be honest with you.
Yep.
But bulletproof, we think. We haven't had to test it, but we feel very happy to have that document in place every time we do a project. And my 3 kids have signed it, each one of them, for each property they own.
Excellent. So I would say, hopefully everybody heard what you just went through is wonderful. And when you say it wasn't cheap, I would say in the long term, it was very, very inexpensive, because it can save you lots of money down the road. And I know that there was one person who said the one who was talking about the producing the screens is that they were going to be inviting in their family. The warning I would have is a lot of times when families are invited in, okay, you're coming in, you're going to run the forklift in the warehouse, and they think that their job came along with ownership. The number of times I have heard that, it is absolutely phenomenal to me that you think you got some ownership at the same time, but a lot of people say, no, I know my aunt gave me 20% and now I want it. And if you don't have things in writing, it's really messy to try to prove. Anybody else?
If you guys aren't Sethi familyed out, this is JP's daughter. So I think for us on the business side, so we have the ownership side in our family, and we own and manage our properties. And there's the operating side. So just to kind of go through some, and we're really lucky we've had our dad to lead us. And as you can see, he's very good at recognizing conflict and putting an end to it pretty quickly. But I would say on the operating side, the hardest conflict I think we've seen amongst us as siblings working together now for almost 11 years has been, and you covered it in your early slides, but the workload fairness, I think, has been a conversation. We haven't really had a lot of issues of how we're using, property or if we're abusing our power, but it's been more about I'm doing more work than you are and I'm more tired and I need you to take more on. And I think that's been kind of the biggest conflict we've had. I don't know if it necessarily was handled so well over the last, several years. I think we kind of ignored it and just thought it would eventually go away. And I don't know if that really was the right thing. I wish we would have been a little bit more open about in the beginning. We have now resolved it. We're actually working on that actively now. And looking back, I think the way we would have handled it is just have had more honesty. I think that sometimes we just don't know how to communicate it. So it comes off very defensive, like people get defensive and you take it very personally. But our dad has been really good to us and has invited in consultants and mediators to help us figure it out along the way. And so we haven't had to do it on our own. And we're really grateful for that. But we've had a consultant once in the beginning for 4 years that helped us learn how to work together and more recently how to deal with the conflict we're having.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. One of the other things I find is having even like a set family meeting. So whether you call it a family council or something else, I mean, I look at a structure where you have a board of directors, they're taking care of the business. But on the side is having a family council where maybe monthly or every other month or at least quarterly, there is some conversation around how is it working, how are we all working together, so that you can do that. And I talk to a lot of my clients about, these are not legal documents, but having those conversations so that you come up with what I call work agreements that you can all agree on, like, yes, I can use this equipment. No, I can't. This person seems to be doing this amount of time, but you're exactly right that it also depends on being able to say it in a way that other people can hear it and not get further offended. So, good example.
Dr. Lang, one of the questions that came on the chat room was, could you please mention the books that you have authored, and which I did not mention at the beginning of your introduction?
Okay, I'll mention two of them. One of them I don't really like, but the first one is probably the one that you'd be the most interested in, and that was Pass the Business, Please. And that was the one that started with the horror story that I told you about, where the father was suing the son, And it was interesting because I sent out to all of my clients at the time to get 2 good examples, and I thought that they would be very much the same. But there's La Tortilla Factory out of Santa Rosa, and the other one is Lundberg Family Farms out of Richvale up by Chico. And what I found going through that is that if I'm going to tie this into conflict, is that obviously the one where there was a lawsuit was extremely high conflict, and they are not named in the book because my attorney was afraid that I would get sued. And the thing that was really different is I thought La Tortilla and Lundberg were very similar, and what I found as I interviewed more and more family members is the La Tortilla is really, really good, but they ended up with a non-family member for the CEO, and then a lot of the brothers of the original ended up with some conflict where they just couldn't resolve it. Lundberg is, I cannot say enough good things about them. They have not experience, doesn't mean they're a perfect family. Most of our families have a little bit of dysfunction, in case you haven't figured that one out in life. But they were and are extremely into thinking things through, having a lot of conversations, very, very structured. They have buy-sell, they have life insurance, they have all the kinds of stuff that you need. They have prenup requirements, and they just are way, way into harmony. So they value the relationships and everybody's input. The one generation talks about the original 4 brothers rarely made decisions about equipment or farm or adding a different line onto their brand unless they all came to the same consensus and they all agreed. So there was a lot of conversation between those family members. Oh, I forgot the other ones. One is Choose Wisely, Please. I think that's about deciding to stay in or out. And the reason I don't like that book is I was going through a really patch of high conflict clients, and I was pretty much talking all of you out of being in a family business. So you might not want to read that one. And then the last one was just a joy to write. It was about Jasper Engines, who they have just an incredible culture, and 2 different families that came together to create that company, which is in Indiana.
So it looks like we are coming to the end of the presentation. Is that correct, Dr. Lang and Rebecca?
I can't think of anything else. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So one of the things that I wanted to say is that, well, let me get back on that video is, first, thank you all so much for joining us today. This is made possible by, number one, our contributors, which are the wonderful speakers and consultants that share their time, not just with our members, but at the board and in our community as well. Please stay safe and stay connected with us. Become a member by visiting our website, and let us know if we can be of service to you at the IFB. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Applause to you guys.